So, what if I told you the housing crisis isn't a housing problem, but actually an economy problem? Not a real estate story, a system story. This crisis was built over 30 years. You had demographic shifts, migrations, tourism. You had outdated planning, cheap credit, slow supply. And once you put all these forces at work and you see how they work clearly, you can predict where the system is going from here. So in this episode, I'll show you the theory, some stories, and I'll give you some tasks to work. Okay, so this is a full scaffold so you can learn faster and connect the dots. These ideas come straight from my book, Transition Science in the Economy. If you want the full framework and the data, that's where you'll find it. Okay, so let's go. This episode of InnovEU, the EU Project Chronicles, is brought to you by my new book, Transition Science in the Economy. In it, I use data from more than 180 countries and 150,000 observations, data points, to show how 5 global shifts, 5 global transitions, the digital, the green, the new globalization, the transition to a war economy, and the housing crisis transition, how these 5 transitions are collapsing the middle class and rewriting prosperity and power. So if you want a clear map of today's economy and economic chaos, search for Transition Science in the Economy on Amazon and get your copy. Demand and supply in the housing market, it's in the textbook world, it's housing is just another market. On the demand side, you have households making decisions, where to live, how big a place they need, whether to rent or buy, depending on the income, on interest rates, on job security, on the expectations about the future. So 2 forces actually dominate demand, income and jobs. So if you have better jobs, higher incomes, more people able to form new households, that will increase demand. And the other force, you have interest rates and credits. If you have cheaper money, that means bigger loans, higher maximum prices, and more people trying to get on the ladder at the same time. This is demand. Then you have the supply side. And on the supply side, you have the existing housing stock. You have new construction, land use rules and planning decisions. You have credit availability. And 3 things matter a lot here. First, time lags. It takes years to plan, to approve, to build. Supply is slow. It's traditionally slow, not very elastic. Second, you have regulation and zoning. What can be built, where, how high, with what energy standards? That's defined for each region. And finally, you have construction costs. And in that, you include time. We have materials, labor, land prices, compliance with the building and green codes, everything. Even before any crisis, housing is not like the market for tomatoes. Supply is not very elastic. It's slow, it's heavily regulated. While demand can move fast when interest rates change, when incomes change with demographic trends, demand can move fast. When demand jumps and supply can't move, prices go up. This reminds me of an Asterix book. I'll have to look for it. Okay, so this is the first point. Second point, how do you get to a housing crisis? Here's the key distinction. A housing crisis is when housing stops being a local problem and becomes an economy-wide constraint, as well as a social mirror. You have a housing crisis when 3 things happen at the same time. Demand goes up fast, supply is structurally slow and constrained, and housing becomes a financial asset first the social good second. So why would demand go up fast? Well, people are moving to cities all over the world. Mankind is getting urbanized, and they look for the big metro areas. On the other hand, you have more people living alone or in smaller households. That's another demographic change. You also have migration flows precisely into the same cities where jobs are, naturally. Finally, you have low interest rates for the past many years, and those make mortgages look cheap, so people stretch their budget. Finally, for the second time, sorry, you also have tourism in some areas. That puts pressure on the use of buildings as lodging and not housing. And well, in general, population is growing in the whole world. Why would supply stay structurally slow and constrained? Well, first you have planning systems that are usually complex and often political. You have regulations or local residents who try to block higher density projects and often try to block new projects. So the land in these cities already used or locked, and you have new requirements, energy efficiency, green standards. All of these raises the cost per square meter. Finally, third place, why would housing become a financial asset first? Well, investors treat housing as a safe asset in a low interest rate world. So you have domestic and foreign capital flowing into real estate, and you have policies that often protect existing homeowners more than future buyers or renters. So when all these three patterns work together for years, housing is no longer a niche, is no longer a local issue. It becomes a macro constraint because it affects productivity, fertility, savings, labor mobility, and it becomes a social mirror. It reflects inequality, political choices, the health of the middle class. So you have a housing crisis. Congratulations. Okay, so how did we get here? What changed to bring us to this situation of many cities living in a terrible housing crisis? What changed? Well, first, interest rates have been low for a long time and credit easy. Central banks cut their rates repeatedly after the major crises in 2001, 2008, Euro crisis, COVID. So cheap credit made it feel safer to take on bigger mortgages. And households bid up prices. You had investors piling in and searching for yield. Credit was a change. Another change. Many cities have become superstars. They have become a place for economic activity growing. So a few urban regions became stars in this economic growth, and the demand grew faster in those regions. And you also had demographic and social changes. As I mentioned before, you have more people, more single-person households, more people living alone. You have later marriages, more separations, older population. Actually, the aging populations increase demand for this accessible, well-located housing. And on top of that, you also had more planning restrictions, what in America call NIMBY politics. And as a result, there is a chronic underbuilding precisely where demand is strongest. You also had green transition bringing construction costs higher, because you now have higher demands for energy efficiency. And that raises upfront construction costs. On the other hand, retrofitting buildings is a long and complex and expensive process. And you also had migrations. Well, where do migrants go looking for housing? Where jobs are? Where are the jobs? In those metro areas? And more, where do expats go for housing? Retired people from Northern Europe, where do they look for housing in Southern Europe? The top of the market, and that has ripple effects all over the market. You also had tourism. After COVID, particularly after COVID, young people want to travel. I think everyone wants to travel, particularly to historic towns. All of these pushed prices and rents up faster than incomes, and that has been going on for many years. So that's how you, in a slow motion process, you build up this housing crisis. Let me add that there's another factor that's peculiar to the construction industry. It's not just that construction is slow, it hasn't become faster. It's not just that it's expensive, it hasn't become cheaper. Productivity in the construction industry has not grown as fast as the average in the economy. And that also contributes to this housing crisis. So, from this housing crisis situation, how do we move from here? What's the transition? Well, the housing crisis transition is how this situation changes over time and how we handle it. The transition is about dynamics, not just levels. And here's what pushed many countries from tense situations into full transitions. The global crisis in 2008 and the euro crisis afterwards, they caused a long period of low rates, and they pushed governments and central banks to keep money cheap for a decade at least. That was great for asset prices. That was not good for latecomers who were buying their first home. On the other hand, IMF interventions often cut construction credit. So construction companies had troubles finding credit for new building. All of this shifted the demand because another factor was COVID. Suddenly people realized they needed more space at home because they needed an office at home. Many times this led people to change locations. Then we had the energy crisis and the war economy dynamics. Higher energy costs made these poorly insulated homes expensive to live in. It's particularly relevant in the south of Europe. So all of these shocks did two things. They revealed how fragile the system already was, and they forced governments, cities, and investors to react. These shocks did not provoke a change in the supply side. Productivity, new technology adoption in the construction industry remained well below the average in the economy, at least up until now. The reaction came from a mix of new policies, new regulations, new funding lines, new business models, and that's what we call the housing crisis transition. It's not the same everywhere, as the data shows. Some manage it successfully, and they'll use the crisis to expand affordable supply, to reform rental markets, and to link housing policy with climate, labor, or social policy. Others stumble and they'll protect incumbents, they shift risk to younger and poorer households, and they turn housing into a permanent inequality machine. It's the same crisis, the same housing crisis, but the transition paths can be very different. The data is very clear about that. I keep talking about data, I mean the data in the AWTY index. So to summarize, the housing crisis is the structural problem. The housing crisis transition is the journey, how we move through that problem over time, and whether we come out with a fair, resilient system or not. For you as a researcher, innovator, or policymaker, this matters a lot, because if you can map demand and supply forces properly, And if you can identify the shocks and the policy responses, you can write proposals that will speak directly to funding priorities, to resilience, inequality, green transition, social inclusion, even digital transition. You can avoid dead ends, pilot projects that ignore supply constraints or regulation, that will fail. So you can position innovation where it has the highest leverage, at the pressure points where demand, supply, and policy are already moving. That's where the money, the impact, and the best publications will be in the next decade. Okay, this is all very beautiful. This is all theory, and how demand, supply, and external shocks pushed us into a full housing crisis, and how different policy choices shape the housing crisis transition. But now I want to walk you through a short story. There's a country, and I bring this story right from the data, the AWTY data. There's a country that has been playing offense on housing for decades. When you listen to this story, keep one question in mind. If you were writing a research proposal or a project today, where in this story is there room for innovation? So the case study is about Vienna. So imagine you are a young teacher, Vienna, Austria. Sorry. Imagine you are a young teacher or researcher and you're moving to Vienna. You're not rich, no family money, but you can still in Vienna find decent, stable rental housing without sacrificing half of your salary. And this is not a miracle, that's deliberate housing policy that's been going on for over a century. Vienna, and more broadly Austria, made a long-term political decision. Housing will not be just an asset class, it's part of the social contract. Well, in practice, what does this look like? Well, in practice, the city owns or controls a huge stock of social and cooperative housing. Rent in this segment is below market and is relatively stable. So they don't own all the housing, they have a share of the housing they own and they use it to regulate the market. There is a strong rental regulation and this makes renting a long-term respectable option. New developments often mix income groups instead of segregating poor and rich. And from the lens of this framework that I explained, well, demand is high, it's a capital city, it's growing, it's attractive, but supply is managed with long-term planning and not just private speculation. So the housing crisis still exists in some segments, but the city has the tools to cushion these shocks. So when interest rates fell and the global capital started hunting for real estate, Vienna didn't suddenly become a speculative asset. The public and the cooperative sector acted as a buffer. So this is what the proactive housing crisis looks like. Because shocks come like anywhere else in the world. Financial shocks, demographic, climate related, but the system is designed to absorb those shocks. So social housing, rental regulation reduce the risk of the middle class being completely priced out. So for research and innovation, Vienna-style cases open questions like how can cities scale social and cooperative housing models without blowing up public budgets, because this costs money. Other questions that this story opens. What digital tools, what data platforms could help cities plan and manage large housing portfolios in a more efficient way? So if you frame a project around some of these questions, you're not just describing a nice city, you're extracting design principles for resilient housing transitions. So what does this story tells us? They have the same macro forces: low interest rates, urbanization, demographic change, climate constraints. They had, of course, different starting points because social housing and regulation was strong for a long time. And therefore, they're making a different transition different from other places, like proactive buffering. Well, this holds the fragile policy experiments together and has different results. Okay, so let's take all of this and turn it into actions you can take this week. What I propose is map the transition path of your city, your country, or your city. Pick one location you work with, and in 15 minutes sketch how demand is evolving. So think about population, incomes, migrations, tourism, interest rates. Sketch also how supply is constrained. Think about planning, zoning, costs, green rules. And from there, try to identify which shocks are the strongest. This instantly gives you a clear narrative for any report, any proposal, any project you are designing. Task number 2, try to identify the leverage point for innovation, because transitions always have a pressure point where small interventions create big change. So try to choose one, or either data and transparency in rental markets, or faster permitting or planning tools, or digital platforms for retrofitting. It can be many things I can think about. Try to identify some leverage point for innovation. You're not trying to solve the whole crisis. You're not trying to save the world. You're just trying to pick the right entry point. Task number 3, write a 3-sentence problem statement. Write the structural problem, that will probably be the housing crisis. Write the transition challenge, how the system is changing in that city, why it matters, why now. And write the opportunity, the innovation space or the research space you want to explore. If you can put that in 3 sentences, you're ready to draft a research proposal or a business plan. If you can't explain it in 3 sentences, you need to work more on that. You don't understand it yet. Okay, let's close. These are tasks that are simple, but they will create leverage for you. They make your proposals sharper, you make your reports more insightful, and they save you time because you stop chasing dead ends. So they make you look like someone who really understands the housing crisis transition. And that's the whole point, transformation, not information. Okay, hope to see you next week.
Credits, author and host Fernando C. Gaspar, music Diogo Gaspar, Lisbon, Portugal, 2024. Reach us by email or DM.